Mr. David Hawkins' fifth grade class has just returned from an enjoyable trip to the local zoo. With the help of the other teachers and some energetic chaperones, the bus home was relatively quiet. However, some of his students start to get rowdy upon arriving back to school as they realize they will still be expected to work for the last 45 minutes of the day. Two of his students, Frank and Bernie, are caught fighting, not for the first time. Mr. Hawkins writes up the incident in an office referral. Later that afternoon, Mr. Hawkins receives an email message from Frank's father. It reads, "When I called Frank this afternoon, he mentioned that he got into a fight with Bernie today, but he wouldn't say much else. I would like to review his discipline reports from this year to get a better idea of what's going on with him." Mr. Hawkins knows that Frank's father lives several hours away in a different state and is not Frank's custodial parent. He considers how he should respond. Should Mr. Hawkins provide this parent with access to his child's education records? Option A, yes. Under FERPA, the school must give Frank's father an opportunity to review Frank's education records. Or Option B, no. Since Frank's father is a non-custodial parent, under FERPA, Frank's mother would need to provide the school with prior written consent to disclose Frank's education records. Mr. Hawkins recalls that FERPA instructs schools to provide full rights to either parent unless the school has been provided with evidence that there is a court order, state statute, or legally binding document that specifically revokes these rights. Mr. Hawkins isn't sure how to respond to Frank's father. He decides to call Principal Carson to get her opinion. "I was just contacted by a parent wanting to view their child's education records, but this parent doesn't have custody. Should I tell him, sorry, the custodial parent will need to sign off?" Actually, FERPA instructs schools to provide full rights to either parent, the principal explains. That holds unless the school has been provided with evidence that there is a court order, state statute, or legally binding document that specifically revokes these rights. If there's any uncertainty, we can verify that the person asking is legally the child's parent, for example, by requesting a copy of the birth certificate. Mr. Hawkins thanks Principal Carson for her help and hangs up. What should Mr. Hawkins tell Frank's father about how he can review the records he is requesting? Option A. Frank's father will need to travel to the school to review the education records because it is a security concern for the files to leave school grounds. Or Option B. The school is required to provide a copy or make other arrangements with Frank's father to inspect the requested records. Mr. Hawkins knows that Frank's father wouldn't be happy to hear that he needs to make a special trip to the school. He decides to call Principal Carson for help. "I know that we usually have parents make an appointment at the school to review their child's education records," Mr. Hawkins says, "but how do I tell that to a parent who lives several hours away?" "Sorry to bother you again," Mr. Hawkins says. "I have another question about how to respond to this parent's request. I know that we usually have parents make an appointment at the school to review their child's education records, but this father lives several hours away. What should I tell him?" "Good question," Principal Carson replies. "If parents live far away, forcing them to come to the school to review their child's education records would effectively take away their rights under FERPA. So we definitely cannot do that. We will need to provide the parent with a copy of the requested records or make other arrangements for him to inspect the requested records." Thanking Principal Carson, Mr. Hawkins ends the call. Mr. Hawkins recalls that generally, schools are not required to provide copies of education records to parents who request to review them. However, Frank's father lives far away. Asking him to travel to the school to review his son's records would effectively block him from exercising his rights under FERPA. In cases like this, the school must provide a copy or make other arrangements for the parent to inspect the requested records. Although he has 45 days to provide access to the education records under FERPA, Mr. Hawkins figures that it won't take long to prepare copies for Frank's father. He decides to get started right away. However, as he retrieves the files, he is reminded that several of the education records include the name of another student, Bernie. He figures that he could mark out Bernie's information without destroying the meaning of the education record. However, he is not sure whether he should. What should Mr. Hawkins do? Option A. Mr. Hawkins should remove Bernie's name and any information that does not pertain to Frank before allowing Frank's father to review the record. Or Option B. Mr. Hawkins should not alter Frank's education record while there is an open request to review the record. Frank's father may already know that Bernie was involved, but Mr. Hawkins nonetheless carefully marks out all of Bernie's personally identifiable information before photocopying the education record. He knows that when an education record contains information on more than one student, the parent may inspect only the specific information about his or her own child, unless the information about the other students cannot be redacted without destroying the record's meaning. Mr. Hawkins thinks that he is required to provide the full record, but he is nervous about sharing Bernie's personally identifiable information with Frank's father. He decides to call Principal Carson for help. No, you will need to mark out any other student's PII before photocopying the education record, Principal Carson answers. If an education record contains personally identifiable information of multiple students, parents may only inspect information specifically about their child unless the information about the other students cannot be redacted without destroying the record's meaning. This makes sense to Mr. Hawkins on further reflection. Frank's parents have a right to review only Frank's information, just as Bernie's parents have a right to be consulted before Bernie's PII is disclosed. Thanking Principal Carson for her time, Mr. Hawkins sets about redacting the education record to remove references to Bernie. When the redacted education records are ready to send, he replies to Frank's father, letting him know to expect them soon. It's been a long day, but Mr. Hawkins feels good about enabling Frank's dad to access the information he is entitled to under FERPA. Working together, he feels confident that Frank's parents and teachers can help Frank manage his emotions and find success at school.